Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week, and this week we go back all the way to 1995 with Ivanhoe's second full-length album, Symbols of Time. But before we get there, Chris, how are you, my man?
Wait, we were supposed to listen to Ivanhoe? I watched the movie.
Oh, shoot. I guess we're going to have to start this over. Edit. No, Ivanhoe, which is, it's funny because this was a band I feel like, for different reasons, we kind of overlooked or definitely haven't mentioned on the show. So I think it's going to be a fun one. But anything new this week that you kind of checked out or heard that caught your ear?
Yeah. There was a couple of new things. Today, I haven't had a chance to listen to this. Maybe you have, but Poets of the Fall has a new album called Ghostlight, and that just came out today. Have you had a chance to listen to it yet? I've only heard the one single, Requiem for My Harlequin, and that was awesome, but haven't heard the rest yet.
No, I am very excited to hear this. I've had a rough day. I'll just leave it at that. I won't go into too many details. I'll just say that we had an issue last night at my house. It's still being rectified. It's probably going to be rectified over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks. But to make a long story of the short, once things settle down, I look forward to checking that out. Amongst some other stuff, you had sent me the new Glory Hammer single, "Fly Away." I don't know how I feel about these guys. I actually like the song, but like with everything I had heard, I'm kind of down on them as a band. I guess many people probably are at this point.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard to separate the art from the artist. And, you know, we've talked about having the same issue with like Ailstorm as well, with everything that went down. And so, I will say the new singer, Sozos Michael, does a really good job here. It's going to take some getting used to, just because I feel like that band was so, it was just so like, the voice, like Winkler, I'm forgetting his first name, but his voice was so like synonymous with the band. So, you know, much like any time a band changes singers, it could take a little bit of getting used to. The song is fine. It didn't blow my socks off or anything, but again, like sometimes it's just hard to get like the negativity out of your brain when you listen to like bands when you know that they got themselves into you know, a stupid situation and got busted. So maybe time will tell how that, you know, if we change our opinions about bands like that.
It's funny because I think that they were really catching on as a band in terms of popularity, and then obviously they, you know, those things kind of went public. So what's curious to me is if they ever kind of regain their the stride, I guess, that they were hitting or that they had hit in terms of the touring and just the popularity, but that they seem to have taken a hit there. So I don't know. I mean, the single I thought was good. I'm definitely going to listen to the album when it comes out. I just don't know if they ever get back to the stature they were. Time will tell. Time will tell.
You know, do you remember when we talked about like surprising amounts of YouTube views?
Yeah.
Glory Hammer is like one of those bands, like, the Angus McFife video has 9.3 million views on YouTube.
That's ridiculous. How is that possible?
The Hoots Force video has 12 million views on YouTube.
That's crazy. I mean, like those are numbers that rival like top 40 artists. You know what I'm saying? Like that's insane.
Yeah. So I mean, they definitely have, I guess, some cachet. It's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that they would have that many listens. I mean, Ailstorm's Drink video has 39 million views on YouTube. So
that's. I mean, it's like the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the AC/DC, and Ailstorm. I mean, those are the big four now. It's bananas. But hey, listen, more power to them.
It's crazy. I just, I mean, I guess that's how bands are getting out there, you know, in this day and age. It's not like the not the MTV music video generation anymore, to say the least.
No, to say the least. Very interesting. I learned something new every day. I just want to mention 2 other singles that I heard that I was really kind of blown away by. A band called Pre-Incarnation. I think they're like a melodic progressive rock band. I think they're from Germany, if I'm not mistaken. They came out with a new single called "Heartless," and I think it's coming from. It's actually the third single from their we don't know, up and coming album. It's kind of amorphous at this point, but really really cool sound. I thought they had like a little bit of a Shadow Gallery meets a Fates Warning type of thing, and just really really impressive song that I don't think anybody is talking about. So I wanted to mention them here.
Yes, I listened to it on your recommendation and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It will be on the next playlist that I upload, along with the next song that you're going to mention as well.
Yeah, so spoiler, All Things Fallen. This is a band who is coming out essentially with their second full-length album called Shadow Way. They announced that album. It's going to come out on June 3rd. They just announced a single called Pandemonium as kind of like the first teaser for the album. I love this band. I love the last album. I love this song. I think that this has real potential. The mastermind here is Marcus Sigfridsson, probably known better for Dark Water and Harmony, two bands who I thoroughly enjoy. They just have a really melodic, catchy sound, and the songs are really, really good. Borderline prog, borderline power metal in spots, but just really, really easily digestible melodic stuff that I think a lot of people will enjoy. So I'll definitely post both of those singles this week. Did you have a chance to listen to that one?
Yeah, I enjoyed both the songs that you told me about, as well as I believe you also told me about a band called Perpetual Fire. And
Oh yeah, this one I was not as crazy about, but I had a feeling this would be right up your alley. It was screaming, fast, happy flower power metal, and but I don't think I ever heard your reaction. What did you think of it?
I loved it. All three of those songs will be on my next playlist that I
Nice.
just about finished constructing. It also has a couple of other. There's a new Evergrey's got another single, which I have to say they were just each song so far from this upcoming album, A Heartless Portrait. I've enjoyed every single. I think this might be my favorite Evergrey album, provided the rest of the album follows suit. And then another Pure Reason Revolution single came out as well, Dead Butterfly. This is another album I'm looking forward to. Everything I've heard from that has been very good.
Being being the prog rock guy that you are, I'm not surprised. Obviously, a lot has changed over the course of the last week with your deep dive into Spock's beard. So I'm sure that the Pure Reason Revolution will crack your top 5 at the end of the year. I have little doubt.
Yeah, and I guess while I'm on the topic, Haken also dropped a new single called Nightingale.
There you go.
So yeah, good tune. Also, just Haken's just one of those prog metal bands that that just I like. Something about their sound I've just always been a fan of. So it's always exciting when they drop a new single. So yeah, just a couple of things. A couple other things will be on this playlist. I don't want to spoil all of it, but yeah, I feel like so far this year, I feel like we've been kind of peppered with really good singles, but I feel like the album output hasn't been as strong as it might have been by this point. I guess we're through a third of the year now. Now it's the end of April, and I feel like I thought there was a stronger collection of albums this time last year and the year before, even more so.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I have a theory about that. You know, like you said, we're a third of the way through the year. I have an ongoing list of albums, you know, that I could potentially see in my top 50 at the end of the year, and it's not a very long list at this point, given where we are in the year. I think that when the lockdown happened, there was a lot of like musical creativity that people kind of used as an outlet for many different things. And I think that a lot of people and a lot of bands came out with albums and new songs and new projects late 2020 and then into 2021. And maybe it's just that bands are going back out on tour. I'll mention some of them in the news section at the end of the show. And maybe it's just a result of attention being spent elsewhere, but I don't know that the albums are coming as fast and furiously as they did last year. There's not that much stuff I've heard this year where I can say, oh, I really loved it. I mean, there's probably about 8 or 10 albums at this point, which I can say are definitively going to be on my end of year list unless something drastically changes. But for the most part, a lot of the stuff is like, it's fine. It's just not exceptional by any means. And I think that that's kind of, again, due to just where we are in the touring cycle and the release schedule for a lot of these bands.
Well, we'll have to see how the rest of the year goes. But as of right now, I have Spock's Beards 5 and Ivanhoe's Symbols of Time in my top 25. So
there you go. I love it. So let's get into Ivanhoe. This is interesting. This request, obviously it was first show of the month, so it's a request. This one comes from Dan Bretherton, and he writes, and indulge me while I read this because he had a lot to say. He says, after being a fan of Queensryche since the late 80s, I had started to get into bands such as Fates Warning, Dream Theater, Sabotage, Symphony X, all in the early 90s. Sound like anybody else? Just like us, right? Then in the mid 90s and around 1996 is when I discovered, the World Wide Web and learned what this music was, which was quote unquote progressive metal. So he runs a search, and all of a sudden bands like Threshold, Shadow Gallery, and Ivanhoe start popping up for him. And these CDs were not easily found in Australia where he lives, so he started purchasing basically anything he could. Just to get his hands on this stuff whenever it was affordable. And he winds up playing Ivanhoe's Visions of Reality and Symbols of Time back to back, just being absolutely blown away by the lead vocals by, of course, Andy Frank, who's now in Brainstorm and then obviously would go on to Symforce and etc. I have a feeling we'll touch on that as well. But he says, I was concerned when I first played Symbols of Time that it had a little bit of a death metal growl at the start and then some doomy or sludgy vocals, that he was actually concerned that they had changed singers, but then realized once Andy kind of goes back to his thing, once those powerful vocals kick in, he was obviously totally on board. He loves this little growl around the 325 mark Till the End of Time, still gets them to this day, mentions sections of vibration and various bass lines through on the song Through the Lines. And then he starts talking about the song Silent Ceremony with the piano intro and a lot of the different pieces. We're going to get into this, as well as the Pantera style riffs and whatnot, but just kind of breaks down the album as we did. He says that his favorite track is By a Feeling. He says he considers it to be the greatest metal ballad of all time. And I got to be honest with you, the song doesn't suck. I don't even know if it's my favorite ballad by the band, but we'll get there. That being said, fantastic song. And he says that the duet with the female vocalist that comes in at the end is just like, kind of awe-inspiring to him. He applauds the band for not using an operatic singer, which was obviously popular at the time. To this day, still wants to know who that singer is. And to be honest with you, so do I. I have no idea who she is. I don't know if you were able to find it, but he goes, a great song to kind of just blast on a great sound system with a good subwoofer. Just a fantastic, quote, subsonic sound that obviously comes across with headphones. Thanks for the opportunity and can't wait to hear your breakdown, and hopefully can get an interview with Andy himself. So listen, obviously a lot of strong words there. We'll break it down a little bit. What was your first exposure to the band? Was it the Andy Frank stuff or the stuff that kind of happened after Andy Frank had left the band after the first 3 albums?
It definitely wasn't the newer era. Ivanhoe was one of those bands that I remember hearing about, but not knowing much from. And like I had those first 3 albums, but I just didn't really listen to them that often, with the exception of the track When I'm Old, which was on the Polarized album. And I think that was just because you were a big fan of that song. So, I mean, this was pretty much kind of a fresh intro for me. I didn't really get a chance to listen to their newer albums. So this was like pretty fresh. So yeah, my knowledge of the band honestly was based on a ballad. So yeah. Obviously I didn't have a very good understanding of what I was about to get myself into.
I have to say that I think I heard Brainstorm and Symforce before I kind of dove into these albums myself. So for me to hear Andy Frank sing so differently than he did with his later bands, it's almost jarring in a sense, because I think that those bands, as much as I like them for what they are, I think they actually hold him back because his vocal performance, and I have no doubt we'll get into it in detail shortly, was one of the most incredible things I've ever heard in any album. I mean, that's how ridiculous the vocals are in this album, and that is not to take away anything from any of the other musicians that were on this album. But God, the vocals. But we'll get there. Let's break it down a little bit. Album comes out February 6th, 1995. So we're going on 27 years now, which is just crazy in and of itself. The lineup is Giovanni Soulis, who is the band's bass player to this day, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he is still going strong. He founded the band. It's basically his baby. Chuck Schuler on guitar, Lars Hornig on drums, Marcus Brich on keyboards, and Andy Frank obviously on vocals. None of these guys, with the exception of Giovanni Soulis, are in the band anymore. They've got a completely different lineup, and they've had a number of releases since then. Andy Frank left the band after 1997 with their Polarized release, and since then they've come out with 5 other albums, most recently Blood and Gold, which came out last year. It's interesting. This band has not suffered from a longevity issue. It's just that they don't release albums as frequently as they did maybe in the mid 90s, but every 3 or 5 years they kind of come out with something new. But for many people that it's this old material, which is what really separated them, because I don't know a lot of bands that were playing stuff like this back in 1995. I really don't. This is kind of, obviously this harkens back to Dream Theater and a lot of other bands like that, but I don't think prog metal was as widespread as it is now. I think you'd agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, we hadn't even started listening to this type of stuff when this album was released. And it was interesting kind of like listening to it. And I was kind of surprised that something like this even existed at that point. I mean, it seems like it's kind of ahead of its time. I think you had mentioned last week that Dream Theater was one of the only bands that was around at this time that was kind of doing similar type stuff, which I guess makes sense. Cause I mean, if I look back at like 1995 and prog metal around that time, I don't know that I could name very much that is in this vein from that time period. I mean, even Fate's Warning, while they were around, I don't think that their sound was very similar to this. This is kind of very keyboard driven, which I really love. And the keyboard style is like, you don't hear it anymore. It has kind of like that almost like Sega Genesis kind of vibe to it, where it's very like early 90s. It fits that era like so well. So I was kind of surprised at how much I ended up enjoying this album, only because I really had like no expectations going into it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I went back and I was kind of racking my brain for bands that were around, and again, this was their second release. They had their first album, Visions and Reality, came out in 1993. Depending on where you look, some people say that this album came out in 1994. My understanding was that it came out in early 1995. Whatever it is, 94, 95. It was their second release. And I'm trying to think back to that time frame, like when or who was coming out with albums that sounded something similar to this. Obviously, Dream Theater, I think, is going to come to mind. I thought of like early Vanden Plas, which was kind of coming around at this time. I thought of Threshold because part of this does remind me of like kind of Wounded Land-ish material. And obviously that was a conversation we had with Richard West that people could check out in the archives when we kind of did a deep dive into, those early Threshold albums. I thought of Royal Hunt, although it doesn't sound like this. Royal Hunt has a very different sound. And another band that came to mind was Sieges Even, which is another like prog metal stalwart from this era. But other than that, nothing really sounded like this. And in many ways, nothing ever would sound like this again because it has a little bit of a dated feel to it, but not really, if that makes sense.
No, it does, but like in a good way.
I don't mean that as an insult. It's great.
It doesn't. I don't think it takes anything away from it. in fact, it kind of gives it like this kind of vintage kind of feel to it. And I think when I first listened to it, I think I messaged you and I said like this album is like like a photo in time or something like that, or like a, because it sounds like 1995. Like it sounds like it might even belong even a few years before it.
Yeah.
But I love that. I love when prog bands are key driven like this one. And I feel like this is again, like back when prog metal was a little less technical and it was just kind of like, we're just going to write a song and like, it's going to be a good song. And we're not going to worry so much about solos and things like that. Just, it has a little bit of, I think it has a little bit of kind of a power metal vibe, in there. It's kind of like a power metal and prog metal marriage, which I think prog metal bands leaned more in that direction back then. I feel like the two genres have kind of spread out further apart since then, but I feel like this has kind of some like power metal elements to it. It's the same way even like certain Dream Theater songs back in the 90s kind of has some power metal elements to it, especially if you go back and listen to like Awake, which is one of their more heavier 90s albums. But I just this was like right up my alley. It reminded me of like the time that when we first started listening to metal, and I think that had I heard this at that time, I probably would have liked it a lot then.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's not as self-indulgent, I guess, as other bands. And, even when I go back and I listen to it earlier today, it's not the instrumental solo sections that jump out at me so much, although I'll get into pieces of that as we talk about some of the songs. But I think what really did it for me was just the quality songwriting, to which you alluded to or said pretty clearly just moments ago, combined with certain elements on certain songs, which I thought made each song, whether it was a keyboard intro here or a vocal section here. That's really what kind of made the album for me. And this is an album I had listened to and whatnot, but I don't think I ever listened to it on repeat for an entire week. Actually, I'm sure I didn't. So it may not have resonated with me as much as it did this time around, because even though I was familiar with the album, it was a good listen, but by going back and listening to it 5 or 6 times, I think I really appreciated it more than I ever have.
Yeah. And for me, I was pretty much listening to it for the first time.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this last week, but I just remember this was one of those bands that Pat and Ralph would talk about. But it just, for whatever reason, there was so much other stuff to listen to that it just never made its way across, my my area or whatever you want to call it. But it has now.
Well,
So
I'm happy we're there, and I'm also curious to see if you wind up going back to listen to the other 2 Andy Frank albums, because if you like this, I think those are going to be right up your alley. But let's get into it. The album kicks off with the title track, "Symbols of Time." It's just under 6 minutes. I have a lot of things to say about this particular song, but before I do, I'm going to just kick it over to you. How does this album start for you?
wonderfully. I like that it just gets right down to business. Like, this was, I think, one of my favorite songs on the album. And I think you just get a little bit of a taste of what's to come. I mean, I just love listening to Andy Frank sing. I think that his voice is so unique. And I remember the first time I heard his vocals in Symforce and Brainstorm, and just being impressed that I didn't think that he sounded like anybody else. And I didn't even know he was, when we got the request to do Ivanhoe, I didn't even know he was their singer.
Really?
At that time. So it was such a pleasant surprise to find out, hey, I actually know somebody that's on this album. And yeah, he is just, I think he's such a underappreciated, underrated vocalist who I think can do power metal and prog metal. But in this case, like, man, the heavy keyboard riffs that like kind of lead into the chorus and stuff, man, this is just so good. And like, it that keyboard sound you mentioned, Threshold's Wounded Land, kind of reminds me of that album. I think I feel like the production's better on this,
Yes, yes.
but it kind of has that kind of time period vibe to it, which was only released 2 years prior to this. But yeah, I mean, there's just oh man, the keyboards mixed with Andy doing those like really high.
Oh,
Oh, it's just so cool sounding. I thought of Mike, our friend Mike, just immediately listening to this because I always joke that like he's always sending me songs by bands and I go and look and like the songs are from 1997, like almost every single time. It's like he's finding new stuff from 1997. And so I heard this and I immediately thought of him because I'm like, oh, this is such stuff that Mike would just eat up. And, I ate it up too. I thought it was great. Great intro. What were your thoughts on this one?
so at the risk of plagiarizing off Dan's request, I just want to read one thing that's in my notes because he said it, but I just want to again be clear that I noticed it too. From the early part of the intro, you would think this was a doom metal band, and I just want to note that because again, if you at the outset, you kind of get a false sense of what this album is, but then you quickly realize this is going to be like Dream Theater inspired prog. But I mean that in a good way because this is when Dream Theater was writing like great songs, back on Images and Words and Awake, and I'll put When Dream and Day Unite up there with those two because I think it's a fantastic album. The way that the verses kind of speed up throughout the song and then get to this chorus that pays off tenfold. I love this song. I think it is one of the most underrated prog metal gems that I've ever heard. And one of the most absolute incredible displays of vocal range that I've ever heard in a song, where Andy Frank goes from his normal register way up the ladder. I mean, way up the ladder, but with such ease and with such grace and simplicity. It's truly, I think, one of the best vocal performances I've ever heard on anything. And I'll say this, as much of a banger of a tune as it is, it is just, it flows so well. And it's just such a well-crafted tune. It could easily be like my song of the week. I'm not going to choose it, but I could. But my immediate thought is like this band should be bigger than they were because I don't know that they ever got the notoriety. And if this song didn't do it, I'm not sure what would.
Yeah, I mean, very fair. I'm glad you mentioned When Dream and Day Unite because I feel like if there was a Dream Theater album this reminded me of, it's actually that very first Dream Theater album.
I agree.
Just for whatever reason, I think it probably is one of the ballsiest Dream Theater albums. It sounds like crap. Like they still haven't released a version of that album that isn't hard to listen to from like a production standpoint, but damn, like there are some really freaking good songs on that album. And, this kind of has that vibe to it. I think it reminds me more of that than an Images and Words or an Awake. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I don't think it's going to be my song of the week either. But I mean, geez, it's definitely worth listening to anyway because I liked it. I liked it a lot. Excellent opening track. Just great stuff. And you mentioned you'd be curious to see if I'll listen to the other Andy Frank albums. I definitely will be.
Yeah, I had a feeling because I kind of could tell you like this. What I will say in full candor is that the second track, Wide Open, I don't love as much, and maybe it's just because I needed to come down from the high that is the opening track. But I always thought something here was missing. The track itself was a touch pedestrian. I thought the intro was cool, very much Rush inspired from that like late '80s, early '90s era Rush, where they kind of went like electronic in certain areas. It's very interesting because of all the songs, I think this is the one that reminds me of When Dream and Day Unite the most. But the best part of the song for me are the bass lines. There are some bass lines that pop on this song, and it makes me think that the production here for a kind of what had to be a low budget production was actually really good. It sounds good. But what I think was missing here are some of the hooks that the first track had. And there was some just odd vocal phrasing during the chorus, which I didn't love. And it almost sounded like Andy Frank was holding back a little, whereas on the first track he just kind of let himself go and just went for it. And for those reasons, I just didn't love this track as much as the first track, or as much as some of the ones that would come after it.
Yeah, this was one of my favorite songs on the whole album.
Oh, wow. There you go. All right. That's really.
Yeah. I something about the way that it starts, it reminds me of maybe like a Status Seeker from When Dream and Day Unite, but like it just, I feel like it has so much energy to kick off the song. And like, I was shocked that it was the longest song on the album because like, I don't know. I just found that it was just interesting all the way through. Again, like the keyboards really shine on this one. I definitely hear that Rush vibe that you mentioned. I haven't chosen my song of the week yet. This is in contention. But yeah, this is one of the ones that really stood out to me. So I'm kind of surprised that you didn't like it as much.
Yeah, different strokes for different folks. I think we talk about placement. Maybe if it was towards the end of the album, I would have kind of appreciated it more, because two of my favorite tracks actually are the last two tracks, which we'll get to. But I think that for me, Symbols of Time was just such a perfect song that no matter what came next, it was going to be a little bit of a letdown. And I think of like, I don't know. I mean, there's so many albums where that first song is just so perfect. You know, an album is magical when that second song is just as good as that first, incredible track. This is a great album. I just don't think that it holds up as well. Whereas, the third song, By a Feeling, which obviously Dan had as his song of the week, his favorite song on the album. This is a well-placed ballad. After two, proggy, mid-tempo, or at least wide open, being a little slower than the opening track, it was time for something different. And this is a fantastic ballad. It starts with a piano intro and Andy Frank's vocals over the top, but there's something so beautiful in the simplicity of the way this starts. And again, the vocal performance here, not only with Andy Frank, but the female vocals, which are a fantastic accompaniment. This is a classic ballad. I don't know whether I like it more than When I'm Old, which is the song obviously you knew about that I had kind of turned you on to just because I love that ballad. But I think what you can tell is this band writes great ballads for Andy Frank's vocal stylings.
Yeah, well, I think that this dude could sing anything and it would be great. But that said, this is just a really great spotlight on him kind of singing with just like a little light piano and just really getting to hear his voice without the guitars and all the heavier instrumentation over it. And boy, he delivers. And I don't know who, maybe somebody can reach out to us and tell us who this female singer is that comes on, but what a lovely duet that the two styles really just complemented each other so well. What a great song. I don't know. I'm with you. I don't know if I can pick between those two ballads now that they're pretty much the only two Ivanhoe ballads that I know. But yeah, I mean, they're both really, really great songs. This is a really great choice. for our friend's favorite track on this album, because it's well deserved. It's a really beautiful emotional song.
Yeah, I well said. I'll leave it there. The fourth track, or kind of the end of side one of the album, if you will, is a song called "Raining Tears." This was a grower on me. I don't know that I appreciated it as much the first one or two times that I heard it, but each time I listened to it, I started to like it more and more. There was something about like that kind of simple bridge that led to this epic chorus that I was really, really enjoying by the end. I don't know that it's the best song on the album by any means, but it's a good song. And there's a key change about 2 minutes into this song, which I thought was really, really cool. And what stood out to me on this track was just how different this sounds than Andy Frank's latter material. This is prog all the way, and it has really no. You'd have no indication that he would go on to such different material with his other bands. This particular track, though, reminded me of another German prog metal band, Dreamscape. I don't know if you're familiar with them. That was Hubie Meisel's first foray into prog metal, a little bit after this album came out, with their release Very, which is just another prog metal gem we should cover at some point. But this particular song would have fit very nicely on that album, Very.
Yeah, that's again like that time period of like those newer bands. I also think of like I'm gonna forget their name, but Lance King was their singer.
Balance of Power?
Yeah, Balance of Power. Another one of those bands from that era that just I remember people talking about, but again, just was like, you only have so much time and so much money to spend when you're young, and you kind of just go with the Ed Guys of the world, of the stuff, the tried and true kind of stuff. So, I kind of add them. Narnia is another band that I put into that kind of category of like, I was aware of them and everybody said they were good, but I just didn't get a chance to listen to them until much later. So yeah, same with Dreamscape. Like you mentioned. But yeah, this is, I agree with you, that part, with the key change, and this kind of has a bit of like a mid-tempo kind of crunchiness to it that I like, that is almost kind of modern sounding for some of the more, like power prog bands that aren't, as much of the wankery types. Maybe like a Symphony X might be a good example of that, where it's just kind of like a straightforward riff, in kind of like a mid-tempo sort of way. Like, I don't know. I not one of my favorite songs on the album, but good. Like I'm with you that like I liked it more and more the more I listened to it.
Nice. The second half of the album starts off with a song called Vibrations, which is kind of aptly named. It starts off with this like Fates Warning-ish, a pleasant shade of gray vibe, but then all of a sudden it goes into some of the absolute best drumming and bass lines on the entire album, which I thought was a real testament to especially the drums, because I thought they really stood out on this track. For some reason, though, I thought the mix on this one track was off. Like, I thought the production on the album was good, but for some reason, I didn't love the sound on this particular album and this particular track. And I also thought that the keyboard patches that were used on this track were a little, I don't know, not as pleasant to listen to as some of the others or some of the other songs. But again, you got the vocals here on full display. This one screamed Wounded Land to me. A decent song, probably my least favorite of the second side of the album, because to me it just starts to get better and better and better from here on out. A good song though, not a great song.
Those parts of the song where Andy kind of like drops down and sings some of those lower parts,
yeah,
really reminds me of like what he would go on to sound like in Brainstorm years
100%.
later. Where you just hear that lower register when he sings like to and fro on this song. Yeah, I mean, this is again, I'm gonna kind of sound like a broken record, because this is a lot similar to like what I said about the Spock's Beard album we talked about last week. But man, I just liked every song on this album. It's just a matter of which ones did I like the most versus which ones did I not like the most. And this is another one I liked quite a bit. Definitely not, it wasn't in contention for like song of the week or anything, but again, like there just weren't any bad songs on this album. So, this was another one that I really kind of, ended up enjoying.
Nice. As I said, to me, the album starts to really pick up steam with Irrigate Poisoning. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this one because this to me, you talked about those crunchy guitar, like I don't want to say simple, but like that crunchy guitar sound. To me, this song screams Vanden Plas, and I am a Vanden Plas fanboy. I love that band. This definitely had that vibe to it, so I was definitely hooked. It's like a hauntingly heavy song, but driven kind of by the low end bass and keys, which I thought is cool. The keyboards on this entire track are just fantastic. It starts a little slow, but picks up really, really nicely. And I thought that there were some weird vocal effects that Andy Frank kind of uses here, but the song itself was so cool that it didn't even matter to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like he's like whisper singing.
But it was not that's not my favorite part of the song, but the rest of it was so cool that it, like I said, it didn't matter to me. It didn't take me out of the moment, and I'm sure they were trying for that, ominous effect because they definitely hit that on the head.
Yeah, like in all honesty, like whenever with a lot of these songs, it's because they start out with such a, I'm just going to use the word inviting, like for me, for my ears, it's such an inviting keyboard sound towards the beginning. Like they hook me into the songs before the vocals even start. And I already know I'm going to enjoy the vocals because I know I enjoy the vocalist, but like, I love that this band, each song just hooks you in before you even have a chance to hear whisper vocals in a box. Cause that's what it sounded like he was doing. When it gets towards the meat and potatoes of the song, towards the middle, like, first of all, I love the keyboards are not lost in the mix. Like they're really front and center. I would even argue that they're probably the most prominent instrument on the song. And so because of that, I ended up enjoying the song a lot. This is probably one of my favorites. It's still not sure which song of the week is. I'm really kind of holding out on deciding. This was a really good one, and this was one of those ones where it feels like the song kind of changes styles, like it's almost like multiple songs within a song, but it does it in such a smooth and interesting way. This was a good one. Good stuff.
I appreciate that. I think that's well said. Inviting, I think, is definitely a very good word to use. We get to the next track, which is Through the Lies. Before I say anything about this, I'll just kick it over to you. This is the 7th track on the album. It's the second longest track on the album. It comes in at just under 7 minutes. Any thoughts on this one?
Yes.
And what would they be?
Starts out like I think I thought I was going to be hearing a ballad based on how the song started. Kind of reminded me, boy, you want to go kick it back. I'll talk about an album we discussed on our very first episode, Inside Out by Fates Warning. Kind of that, kind of just mid-tempo, chill, prog metal kind of vibe to it. Then Andy comes in and just like starts belting out these high notes as only he can. And then it starts to pick up. It starts chugging, and you start getting some of these like heavy guitar riffs. It's it's not one of my favorites on the album, but again, it's still a really good song. But I don't think I liked it as much as the previous track or the following track, which was the last song on the album.
Open your eyes, open up your mind. Come hear the sirens
It is my track of the week. I love this song. And it's
Okay,
funny
cool.
because we both like this album, but we like, I think, with the opening track aside, I think we actually enjoy different tracks, which is making this a really interesting exercise. I think that top to bottom, it's the best written song on the album. The verses, the chorus, the musicianship is on full display. And although it's really proggy, it's a great tune. Like it's just well constructed. And even though it's almost 7 minutes, it just flies by to me. And so I want to have another excuse to listen to it. So I'll make it my song of the week. I think it's a fantastic track. And although I definitely had Silent Ceremony, the last track, in contention as well, I'm going to go with Through the Lies. Silent Ceremony starts off like a church hymn to me. I almost felt like I was in a pew at church. Very, very mellow. And then once those drums kick in, the song just turns around completely. And it's an awesome closing track to a really good album. There's a lot of crazy time changes that are thrown in here. It goes from heavy to mellow, back to heavy, and some crazy drum fills as well. I feel like this would be the perfect song to hear live, and I think if I had to choose one to hear in a live setting, I feel like this one would come off the best. It's a great way to close the album, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more. It was honestly going into this. It was between this and Wide Open. Those were my two favorite tracks, I think, on an album full of really good songs. I love, again, like when it gets into the chorus. There's something about the way that Andy enunciates when he sings, and like when he says like seriously in the song. It's just like you could just picture that it's him singing it. Like I don't know what it is about it. It's just so like wonderfully Andy. And so I think I'm gonna give Wide Open the edge. I think that was just by a shade my favorite track, but this was up there too. I like this song a lot, and like you said, a really great choice to finish the album. And just on a whole, I just thought that the album, the bunch of times I listened to it this week, I thought it just flew by to the
Yeah.
point where I didn't even realize it ended. Like Polarized just came on afterwards, and I thought I was still listening to Symbols of Time. And then the last couple of times I had to just pick the album so that it would end where it's supposed to end, because I was just like, I guess I'm just listening to Ivanhoe for the rest of my life, or at least until I run out of Ivanhoe songs. But good stuff. I mean, the album came in at a little just shy of 50 minutes, but very easy and enjoyable listen all the way through.
Yeah, no question about it. I want to thank Dan for the request. This was a good one, and I'm not sure it's something that we would have covered otherwise. So I'm glad we went and kind of did a deep dive into it. Scale of 1 to 10, what is this going to be for you?
I will give it I'm going to give it an 8.0. This was just another example of how there's just holes in my knowledge of metal through the years, where there's just you can't I mean, you can listen to everything, but most people can't. And this one just kind of passed me by. And again, like the requests have really done such a great job in filling a lot of gaps, for me. So this was something I'm really glad that was requested, because again, just it was a pleasure to listen to. Wasn't a slog at all, and it just it I think it gave me another band that I can talk about when I'm talking about the history of this fantastic genre. Really good stuff, and I would rather listen to this than newer Dream Theater. I'll just say that.
Big words, but I can understand that. Keep the requests coming. We have a number of them in the queue, but we obviously want more, and we'll continue to hit them as they come in. So we love them. That's why we do it the first week of the month, and we look forward to getting more of them. Before I have you tell us about our album for next week,
Sir.
Oh yeah.
1 to 10.
Oh yeah, I forgot. It's funny in my head. I had already said it. I'm giving it an 8.0 as well. I'm right there with you. It's not a perfect album, but it's really good, and I think it's in the conversation for prog metal albums that people should not overlook, even though it's almost 30 years old at this point. Just a really, really good, enjoyable album, and one that's kind of, no pun intended, been lost to time in many ways because nobody talks about these guys, but they should. And, obviously we'll post some tracks this week as well. So it's an 8.0 for me. I feel like it's been a long time since you've, kind of made a request just because of the way the scheduling has worked and stuff like that. But before we get to your request, some brief touring news, both that I had mentioned to you earlier in the week. A band we have never talked about, Apocalyptica, is going out on tour with Wheel and Leprous as their support. They're playing Long Island in September, so I'm very curious. That it actually opens in Athens, Georgia on September 6th. The tour ends out on the West Coast in Sacramento on October the 7th. I thought this was just a really cool lineup. I think Wheel is a very, very underrated prog band that's kind of hitting their stride. Leprous is just fantastic. I would never go see Apocalyptica, or at least I would never think to go see them, but something about this tour has me really curious to go just check it out.
I would go. I feel like Leprous is doing a hell of a job getting linked into these US tours, and I think it's great that they're getting some exposure, because I just think that they're such a great band, and I think that they put on such a great live show.
Yes.
That I think they're definitely going to be creating new fans as they open for bands like this. And I think fans of a band like Apocalyptica would probably enjoy a band like Leprous. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more. And I think that they're not only getting on tours, but they're getting on tours with bands that are just a little bit different, that they will be able to pick up fans along the way. It's like there's intelligently placed booking, I think, by whoever is doing their booking. So kudos to them.
That's probably Paul Heyman.
Yeah. One other band that announced this, basically a 2-week run of shows, and that's At the Gates, the Swedish death metal, melodic death metal pioneers, beginning out on the West Coast in Los Angeles on August 17th, ending in New York City on August 30th. I had a chance to see them on 70,000 Tons. They are a intense live band, and I would recommend that anyone who is a fan of melodic death metal check out these stalwarts, because the genre kind of just started with them. So definitely worth seeing. And I don't know what's going on in August, but something to definitely keep an eye on. I think I'm actually going to be away that week, but nonetheless, I would love to check these guys out if I had a chance.
Awesome. The first track from Polarized came on, Lonelies. The song is awesome.
Yeah.
I gotta listen to those other two, Andy Frank Ivanhoe albums.
Are we doing Polarized next week? Is that your choice? Is that your final
I don't
answer?
know, because what if I love it and you hate it? That'd be a very polarizing album.
But there you go. I listen. I'd be down. I'll be honest with you. If you pick Polarized, I actually wouldn't. I wouldn't object to that at all. But the time is now. So what are we listening to next week?
So I have a band, but I want you to choose the album.
Okay.
And this is a band that I just never got into for whatever reason, and I think I need to just sit down with one of their albums and just really dig into it. They don't exist anymore, but their former singer is very well known in the community now as the current singer of Nightwish, Floor Jansen. So as you may have guessed, I would like to talk about After Forever, and being that I'm not super familiar with them, I'm gonna let you choose which album we talk about.
First of all, I love the selection. I think it's a great band, and I think that when you hear the marriage of Floor Jansen and I'll leave it to you. I'll say it this way: you are going, no matter which album I choose, I think you're going to fall in love with the band. I think it is a very difficult choice to pick one, and I'll tell you why. earlier material is very, very not only heavy, but it's also very classically driven. And I don't know that it's as accessible as their self-titled album, for example, which came out in 2007. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of choose one, but I think, which one do I go with? I'm going to go with, you know what? I'm going to go with After Forever, their last release from 2007. It's 15 years old. I think it's the most accessible, and I think once you hear that, you're going to want to just go into deep dive mode and listen to all the older stuff. But I think that one's going to be the easiest one to digest, and it also happens to be my favorite. So, which is, by the way, no pun intended, very polarizing because a lot of people prefer their first 2 or 3 albums, but we'll get there. But we're going to do their self-titled album from 2007.
Very nice. Yeah, I just feel like it's a band that doesn't really get mentioned much anymore, mostly because they, haven't done anything in 15 years. But I know they played at Prague Power before I started, reattending with any sense of regularity, and I kind of wish that I had seen that, knowing that, I mean, was it there? Did they ever play in the U.S. besides Prague Power? I mean,
as far as I know, that was a U.S. debut, and that show was actually on the heels of this album that I selected based on your pick. That show was ridiculous. It's before obviously Floor had joined Nightwish. But this is it was that show really that put her on the map. I was familiar with some of the older albums, but that show is what blew me away. And then when she was selected to join Nightwish, I knew they had a star because her vocals are just, she could do the Tarja stuff. She could do the Annette stuff. And then she obviously brings her own flair to the newer material. She's all world, no question about it. And that's why the band hasn't lost any steam. And they're still selling out stadiums in Europe and arenas, all across the world. So, good choice. I'm glad you chose them. And I think it's a band that, quite frankly, they were on my list to get to. So it's just one that I'll just cross right off my list because they were on a list of bands that I was going to choose. So I'm glad you picked it. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah. I just, knowing that I will be seeing Nightwish in just a few days, I kind of had Floor on the brain anyway. And, I also probably could use a little bit of knowledge about the whole history of the band. Cause, my understanding is that like the band was, a band that was like partially started by Mark Jansen, and then he ended up leaving After Forever to start Epica. So, I'm curious. I think it'll be an interesting learning experience for me. And I mean, the songs that I do know, which are few and far between, I like a lot. So, I know that like the earlier stuff, I think of the song Follow and the Cry, because I believe nice. Mayan covers it.
Live,
they
play it live.
Yeah. This sounds like Epica / Mayan. Like this, you can tell that this is the brainchild of Mark Jansen. And
yeah, I was just
I think that they kind of turn away from that after he leaves the band. If my understanding is correct. So
yeah, we'll get into the details and kind of like the breakdown of the band. And like I said, their sound kind of changes, I guess, over time. But to be fair, Mark Jansen is there up until about 2002. And then the sound kind of changes a bit, but you could tell his imprints were on that early songwriting. And the newer stuff doesn't deviate all that much. But this particular album is a bit of an outlier in their catalog. But I still think it's worth hearing. And then it's like kind of sticking your toes in the pool, and if you like that, you're going to dive right in and listen to all of it. So that's why I chose it. We'll get there. But thanks for coming on. It was definitely a fun one. I'm glad that Dan made the request, and I look forward to talking about After Forever next week and hearing a review of the Nightwish show, which I am insanely jealous of you that you are going to.
Yeah, the next week will be Floor Fest.
I love it. I look forward to talking to you soon, and we'll be back with some After Forever next week. Take it easy, buddy.
Take care.